are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Did anybody sing lullabies over you when you were little? Do you remember your favorite Disney song or your favorite song when you were little? Who's the person that fed you or did homework with you or taught you to ride a bicycle? This chapter is going to talk a lot about child development and where we've come from. Being sensitive to you guys, I know that every family has a different story. You've got trials and triumphs in your family. We're going to talk about some of the things that are the most important, the foundational stuff like secure attachment and personality development. I think that you're really going to like this chapter, and I hope it blesses you. So let's get started. Okay, in this chapter, we're going to explore human development, essentially by way of learning a little bit about infancy, childhood, adolescence, and growth through the lifespan. We're going to focus on the important foundational elements of what makes you you. One of those key terms is going to be attachment. But we're also going to talk about the different age brackets and how there are different challenges and lessons in each stage. As always, I'm looking forward to you learning new things about yourself and others in this chapter. So here's my encouragement. Try very hard to take this content and bring it home. Analyze your own upbringing. Analyze and think about what you've learned from your caregivers. Think about your personality and your temperament and your story. Your developmental story of where you've been, where you are, and where you're going, that matters a lot. So I really hope that you will apply some intrapersonal intelligence to this chapter. Think a little bit about yourself and who you were, who you are, and who you will be, and how your caregivers and friends and siblings and families and teachers and mentors and other people growing up, how important they are to who you are and who you will be. Vested within this chapter as well is a hearty hope for health and wellness. And I want to just take a moment right now at the start of this chapter to acknowledge a couple things. Not everyone comes from a healthy home. And not everyone has a healthy family dynamic. Number one, if that's you, you're not alone, and it's not your fault. And number two, this chapter is not meant to be a perfect pathway of what your life could have been or should have been. What we're just going to look at right here is some of the patterns that are normative patterns from most kids to adolescents to adults, okay? So I want to acknowledge that this chapter is not meant to make anybody feel bad. It's actually meant to bring you insight, self-reflection, and intrapersonal knowledge that you can use to apply to have better boundaries, better healthiness, and a greater understanding of who you were, who you are, and who you will be. And from my heart to yours, you guys, if you haven't had the best experiences growing up, I just want to say I'm so sorry. As one of the good guys, hopefully, and as a teacher, I'm getting emotional. I'm really sorry that the people in your life haven't done what they needed to do. If your dynamic or your household or your relationships with your family are not the best, you have my esteem, you have my heart, you have my care, and I want healthiness for you. So I'm hoping that this chapter brings some insight to some of those places. And hey, if you had awesome parents and an awesome childhood and everything was great, be grateful for that, be mindful for that, and be appreciative of it, right? So what's at the heart of this chapter? Well, this chapter, which is entitled Human Development, is about development. It's how we grow. It's how we move through who we were, who we are, and who we will be. Development is the pattern of continuity and change in human capabilities that occurs throughout the lifespan. It doesn't just stop because you've graduated high school. You keep growing. And you know what, you guys? You're going to graduate college soon. I know it looks a little bit different than you thought, but you're going to go to a different season of your life, but you still grow. You're still growing. And as psychologists, we're interested in growth and change. As we're interested in growth, and as it's a theme of this chapter, let's take a moment to be mindful of our growth mindset. So do me a favor, close your eyes right now. Put your hands down at your side or in your lap. And let's take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Okay, I'm going to ask you a few questions and you're just going to answer them to yourself. What's one thing that's going right today? What's one thing that you're doing better this year compared to other years? So with your eyes closed, nice and relaxed, let's hear the wisdom of the growth mindset here. Growth means it's okay to move up and down. Growth means that challenge is an opportunity to learn a new thing. You are learning so many new things right now, and you're doing an awesome job. All right, open your eyes. We're excited about this chapter and about development because we're living it right now. You are living it right now. So with that in mind, let's see this chapter not as a mountain that arduously has to be climbed, but as an adventure that we get to have with one another. Let's go. One of the big questions involved in human development has to do with the question of, from where does this growth and development originate? Does it come from nature or nurture? So if you see a change in personality or a change in skill, or you see a display of human behavior or mental processes, has that come about because of biological origins, or has that come about because of the home life that you've had? This is the nature-nurture debate. Nature has to do with essentially your biological makeup or your biological inheritance. This is your nature, your genetic structure, your DNA, your physical person. Nurture, on the other hand, has to do with the outside or contextual experiences, the environmental experiences, the caregiving experiences, the situation. So let's put that into perspective. Many things are a combination of both nature and nurture. And some of them are more nature-based, and some of them are more nurture-based. For example, your height is more determined by your biological inheritance or your nature. But something like your values or your beliefs, they're more determined by your nurture or your environmental or contextual experiences. And some things, like your personality or your aptitude or your intelligence, some things are a little bit of both. You've got biological things going on, but the nurture element also plays a role. On many psychological things, things like addiction, academic performance, mental health issues, athletic performance, intelligence, personality development, for things that are highly complex like that, psychologically complex, nature and nurture will work together to create an outcome. So let me give you an example. So let's imagine I have Heather as someone in my life. That's not her real name, I'm just creating a name. And by her nature, Heather has a dopamine system that is sort of under-rewarded and that is seeking more reward. She has a biological craving for rewarding experiences more than other people do. And we all do, but she has some biological things that she's inherited that make her brain a little bit different. Now, Heather in a healthy environment growing up might make those rewarding experiences to be stuff like academics or athletics or performing in some way, right? So she puts her heart behind the basketball team or puts her heart behind the art that she's working on or the grades that she's getting. In another environment, an environment that has drugs and easy access to drugs and maybe some abuse and some sexual stuff and just some other things going on there, it's possible that the nurture of that situation could have her brain go in that direction, right? So you have the same proclivity, but different environments play a role. And this brings up an important point. Heather has a role to play in this. Now, she might not have had a role to play of which house she was born in, but once she becomes old enough to take an active role in her own development by way of making decisions for herself of whether she's going to go to school today or skip school, right? She's making decisions. That the self also takes an active part in its own development. So Heather is also making decisions, whether she's coming from a great home or a really hard home, making decisions that impact her own growth and development. And this gives me hope. It reminds me of a concept in psychology that we call resilience. It also goes by another name, and that's called hardiness. Resilience is a person's ability to recover from or adapt to difficult times. Let's imagine that Heather is in the caregiving situation that is rough. It's the rough home. There's access to yucky stuff. Is it possible for Heather to also rise up outside of that stuff? Absolutely. And resilience is that person's ability, that's Heather's ability to either recover from the terrible things that have happened or to adapt and be safe through difficult stuff. And I think this is really timely for all of us as we're having to be resilient, we're having to be hardy, we're having to show strength and grit. So when a person faces a challenging experience, the voice of resilience is going to say, this is not your fault, this is not personal, this is something that you're going to grow from and rise above. But I'm going to see this as an opportunity to grow, to endure, to heal, to show compassion, and to learn. And we see the importance of resilience. That voice, that perspective of resilience, it's important. Children that are resilient and have that running through them, this is essentially a growth mindset. They become more capable adults because the world really is going to have lots of challenges. So we want to be people that instill resilience in ourselves and others, especially the kids around us. The research shows that parents that instill a sense of resilience and agency and bravery in their children enable their children to feel more capable later as an adult. Now, sometimes parents don't do those things perfectly, right? They're humans and not robots. Sometimes parents didn't want to raise you that way, and sometimes parents didn't have the capability to because no one did that for them. So if you haven't heard it in a while, I want you to hear it from me. You are brave, you are kind, you are smart, you are valuable, you are strong, you are diligent. You're going to get through this. Moving forward, you're going to see that in regard to development, there are different domains of development. You have your biological processes, your cognitive processes, and your social and emotional processes. Biological processes have to do with nature. That is your physical being, your body, your brain, your longevity, your physical person. How tall you are, how fast you can run, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your eye color, things that are biological. They're in the physical domain. You also have cognitive processes, right? This is thinking, intelligence, mental processes. This has to do with creativity and problem solving and critical thinking. It is essentially chapter 8, right? And you also have your social processes having to do with social skills, group interactions, group dynamics, as well as emotional processes that have to do with feelings, interpretation of feelings, expressions of feelings. And all these things, you guys, biological, cognitive, social, and emotional, they overlap. Who you are is the combination of all these things. So when we are talking about human development, we need to remember that this is multifaceted and has multiple domains of influence. You are more than just one thing. All right, we want to move forward and talk a little bit about research methods in developmental psychology. The question here has to do with how we study age-related differences. How do we do that? Before I talk about 2 different approaches in developmental psychology, I want you to watch a little video, and this is from a classic study called the marshmallow experiment. Ready, set, begin. Okay, in this video we saw different age groups being given the same experimental task. In this task, they are given 1 marshmallow, and they're told if they can wait, when the experimenter gets back, they'll get another one so that they have 2, but they have to wait for her to get back. So they can either have 1 now or 2 later. If we do this study with 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, and 4-year-olds, these are different 2-year-olds, different 3-year-olds, and different 4-year-olds. If we do it all at one time, that's going to be a cross-sectional study, because I'm getting a cross-section of each age. What you'll see in cross-sectional studies, and most developmental psychology studies are indeed cross-sectional, is you're going to study different age groups at the same time. So if I study 3rd graders, 5th graders, and junior hires on a social skill task, and I study them all at the same time, I can compare 3rd grade, 5th grade, and junior high on that domain. That is a cross-sectional study. Cross-sectional studies, however, have a side effect, which is that sometimes we're not so sure if the differences that we're seeing have to do with age bracket or they have to do with something that we call cohort effects. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that I presented memes to a Gen Zer and a millennial and a boomer, okay? And I asked them to rate how funny each of these memes was to them. If we see differences in their ratings, we're not entirely sure that that has to do with age bracket. It might have to do with the cohort that they're in and the generation that they're in. There might be other factors that lead them to be different on that measured variable. In this case, how funny the memes are across groups. So cross-sectional studies are easier to do because I can do them right now, and I can do them with different age groups right this very second. I can collect the data now. But sometimes we're not entirely sure, and it's a little bit complicated to sort out if the differences on the dependent variable have to do with age or they have to do with different generations or different cohort effects. Therefore, one of the reasons that we do different types of studies, longitudinal studies, is to address the potential impact of cohort effects. A longitudinal study is going to be much harder to do because this is going to involve time. We're not going to be able to collect this data right now. We're going to have to collect it over time. So in my original study, the study that had 3rd graders, 5th graders, and junior hires, and I was studying them on their social skills. A longitudinal study approach would be, we would take a group of 3rd graders and we would test them at 3rd grade, and then 2 years would go by. we would test them at 5th grade, and then 2 years would go by and we would test them in junior high. Now, that study from 3rd grade to 7th grade, that study took 4 years to complete. So longitudinal studies are more time invested. They're more expensive. They require more work, but they give us really valuable insights about how one group of people that are within the same cohort develop over time. So when we see differences in their scores of social skill between 3rd, 5th, and 7th grade, in a longitudinal study, we have more basis to claim that those changes are due to age. We turn now to a description of how the process of development essentially unfolds from its earliest moment, the moment of conception, and that's when the 2 parental cells with their unique genetic contributions merge to create a new individual. Conception occurs when a single sperm cell from a male unites with an egg or ovum from a female in a process that we call fertilization. Over the next few months, that genetic code or nature that we were talking about earlier, it directs a series of biological changes in that fertilized egg. So let's talk about the course of prenatal development. Okay, prenatal development lasts approximately 266 days. It begins with fertilization and ends with birth. Pregnancy is usually divided into 3 different periods, and these are different than the trimesters, okay? So biologically speaking, in developmental psychology, we talk about 3 periods: germinal, embryonic, and fetal. So let's start with the earliest days. So the earliest days are the germinal period. And the germinal period is the period of prenatal development that takes place in the first 2 weeks after conception. It includes the creation of the fertilized egg, which we call the zygote. There is cell division, and there is attachment of this multicellular zygote, essentially, to the uterine wall. So rapid cell division by way of mitosis happens during this germinal period. So we have essentially conception has to do with sperm and egg meeting. The ovary obviously releases an egg, and sperm cells from the man go into the uterus, into the fallopian tubes, and within about 24 hours, essentially the sperm and egg will meet if conception takes place within the upper third of the fallopian tube. That means the area closest to the ovary. Then cell division has to take place. This fertilized egg has to divide and travel towards the uterus because it's going to implant or potentially not implant into the uterus. So the first thing that happens essentially is that the female has an ovary, and the ovary releases an egg into the fallopian tube. That single egg is released at a particular time in her menstrual cycle, right? Now, if she has intercourse at the time of this egg being available, fertilization can happen when the sperm meets the egg, usually within 24 hours after ovulation. And that fertilization of the sperm meeting the egg happens usually in the upper third of the fallopian tube, the area closest to the ovary. Within 24 to 30 hours after fertilization, that sperm and egg will chromosomally, they'll unite. And as they unite and become a fertilized cell, that's a zygote. Around that time, there will be the first cell division. And around 36 hours, you'll have 2 cells now. At 48 hours, there'll be 4 cells. Now, as this cell division takes place, what's happening is that the zygote is traveling towards the uterus to implant in the uterus. By around 3 days, as this organism travels towards the uterus, you're going to see essentially that the cell division has about 16 to 32 cells now. By 4 days, what happens is The cells create a hollow ball. They call that a blastocyst. A hollow ball, imagine like a basketball. It's not dense, it's not completely solid all the way through. So around 4 days, you have something called a blastocyst, and that is somewhere around 64 to 120 cells or so. In days 4 and 5, that blastocyst is still developing and dividing, but also heading towards the uterus. And around a week after conception, what's happening is that the cells themselves are going to start to specialize. They're going to start to be differentiated, we call it, specialized for different tasks. So around 6 or 7 days, that blastocyst is going to start to attach to the uterine wall, having traveled from the fallopian tube all the way over to the uterus. Now, in the second week after conception, implantation or the embedding of that blastocyst into the uterine wall takes place. So it's going to become more connected with the structures of the uterine lining and the uterine wall. In the next period of development, we have the embryonic period. The embryonic period is this period from week 2 on to about week 8. During the embryonic period, the rate of cell differentiation totally intensifies. The reason that we call this the embryonic period is that this blastocyst that's implanted into the uterus is now going to be called an embryo. And there will be 3 layers of cells that form. The endoderm, which is the inner layer of cells, is going to be stuff like the digestive tract and respiratory system. The ectoderm is going to be the outmost layer, and that's going to be stuff like nervous system, sensory receptors, ears, nose, eyes, skin, hair, and nails. And the mesoderm, or the middle layer, is going to become stuff like circulatory system, muscles, excretory system, reproductive system, bones. And every body part eventually develops from these 3 layers. So you're going to see the differentiation of tissue in such a way as there's different cells that are set to be different tasks. But also organogenesis, which is organ formation. And that's the name given to the process of organ formation during the first 2 months of prenatal development. While these organs are being formed, they're particularly vulnerable to environmental influence. And this is why drinking and smoking and stress and outside stuff can be very hazardous. Those hazards are called teratogens. They are hazards to prenatal development. Now, as the embryo's 3 layers form, we also see the systems and support structures that are going to support prenatal development forming too. So we're going to have essentially the placenta, we're going to have the umbilical cord, and we're going to have structures that basically support the safety of the embryo. We're also going to see the umbilical cord, which typically has 2 arteries and 1 vein that connect the baby to the mother's placenta. Very small molecules like oxygen, water, salt, and other nutrients from the mother's blood, as well as carbon dioxide and digestive waste from the baby's blood, are going to pass back and forth between the mother and the embryo. Virtually any drug or chemical substance that a pregnant woman ingests can cross that placenta to some degree, unless it's metabolized or altered or just too large to pass through. So what the mother takes into her system, the embryo is also being influenced by. All right, in our final period of prenatal development, we have the fetal period. And the fetal period lasts about 7 months, and it's the period that extends from month 2 to the end of essentially the end of the pregnancy by way of delivery. In this period of time, you're going to see tremendous and amazing growth. 3 months after conception, the fetus is about 3 inches long and weighs about 1 ounce. It becomes active, moving its arms and legs, opening and closing its mouth, and moving its head. The face, forehead, eyelids, nose, and chin are all distinguishable at this time, as are the upper arms, lower arms, hands, and lower limbs. In most cases, the genitals can be identified as male or female. And by the end of the 4th month, The fetus has grown to about 6 inches in length and is about 4 to 7 ounces. At this time, a growth spurt occurs in the body's lower parts, and usually for the first time, the mom can feel those arm and leg movements. By the end of the 5th month, the fetus is now about 12 inches long and weighs around a pound. Structures of the skin start to form like toenails and fingernails. The fetus becomes more active and will have a preference for a particular position inside of the womb. By the end of the 6th month, the fetus is around 14 inches long and usually gains another 6 to 12 ounces. The eyes and eyelids are completely formed, and a fine layer of hair starts to cover the head. As early as 6 months of pregnancy, around 24 to 25 weeks after conception, the fetus for the first time has a chance of surviving outside of the womb, and that's called the age of viability. Obviously, babies that are born that premature are going to usually need some help with breathing because their lungs aren't fully mature just yet. By the end of the 7th month, the fetus is now around 16 inches long and weighs around 3 pounds. During the last 2 months of prenatal development, we're going to see even more organ growth and development. Heart, lung, kidneys, liver. We're going to see different systems continue to grow. And the baby's also going to grow in weight and height. So they're going to get longer and heavier. Often, on average, about 4 pounds gained in those last 2 months of pregnancy, such that by birth, most American children are somewhere around 7.5 pounds and around 20 inches long. This process is remarkable, and I have a little video that I want to show you right here so we can appreciate it more. So we know that this process is quite amazing, but it's also a quite vulnerable time as well. I had mentioned before the impact of hazards to prenatal development. And these hazards are something we call teratogens. And teratogens are agents that cause harm to the developing fetus or the developing embryo and can also cause birth defects. Examples of teratogens are things like smoking, alcohol, sexually transmitted infections, but even stuff like viruses or prescription drugs or hazards from the environment that you're in. So you don't have to smoke, but if you're close to a smoker or you're close to a factory that is putting out all these chemicals into the air around you, that could still be a hazard to prenatal development. Now, the effects of those teratogens depend on the timing of exposure as well as genetic characteristics of both mom and fetus. Now, we also know that the postnatal environment, or the place in which a child is going to be living right after birth, that has an effect on how those teratogens express themselves. In a very nurturing environment in which there's food and safety and secure attachment, we're going to see a better outcome for kids because the environment's going to be able to buffer and protect from some of those negative potential effects. Now, right after birth, a child comes to the world with some genetically wired behaviors, and some of these are very crucial for survival. Some of them persist throughout life, like coughing, blinking, and yawning, and some of them will disappear as the neurological system develops. So we see in this picture here, this is the grasping reflex. And the grasping reflex is that a child will usually grab whatever touches its palm. There's something called the rooting reflex, and the rooting reflex means that if you brush the side of a child's cheek, the child will turn towards the direction of that. Now, it's called rooting because it's meant to be breastfeeding, right? So the child will know which direction to turn in order to breastfeed. And the Moro reflex happens when a child will flail its arms and legs out in a rigid fashion in order to respond to a startle or something that had scared them. The thought behind a Moro reflex has to do with the child expanding its body and becoming more able to be caught if it was falling. And in all of these things, we see that children are not blank slates. They're not coming to the world with nothing. They're coming to the world with reflexes and preferences. And you know what's really cool? They've heard their mother's voice. They've taken in their mother's accent and the things that she's listened to and the language that's been around her. They've taken in the food preferences and the type of food that she eats in such a way as infants will prefer food in the direction of their culture. And as a child grows, its motor skills, both gross motor skills and fine motor skills, are going to develop. So gross motor skill has to do with the development of big core muscles, trunk and big muscle groups. That's like standing, sitting, walking. Those are gross motor activities. Fine motor activities are going to have to do with stuff that is like grabbing and pinching and handling, smaller, more fine-tuned motions. Two of the primary motor skills that are going to be developed have to do with locomotion, that's walking, as well as reaching and grasping. Another way that we study infant development has to do with something called preferential looking. Since infants don't have the ability to express their desires and needs, they can look, they can eventually point, but they can't just say, "Hey mom, I really, really want orange juice right now." Or, "Hey mom, that stuffed animal is so fun, I'd like to grab it and play with it." So one of the ways that we assess what they want is by giving them choices and watching where they look and what they're attending to and what they're placing their eye gaze on as a way of measuring preference, because they will look at the item that they want brought to them. This time of infancy is such a time of brain development. These new connections being formed are essentially neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to grow and forge connections. These are neurons that are connecting. And as those neurons connect, neurons that fire together wire together. They're having communication across the synapse. So in regard to neuroplasticity and brain development, you're going to see three main things: myelination, neurons connecting, and brain mass increasing. So first and foremost, you're going to see the myelin sheath and myelination. That myelin sheath is going to cover more and more neurons. That makes the electrochemical impulse faster. Remember the action potential that we talked about earlier in class. We're also going to see neurons connect with one another. Neurons that fire together wire together. And by wiring together, what we're seeing is that they're communicating across that synaptic gap. And those connections are going to increase dramatically. They will increase even more so in enriching environments. And also, we're just going to see an increase in the mass of the brain. There's going to be more neurons and more connections and more cells and more myelin as it forms, develops, and continues to grow. Okay, I want to move to the next really important topic, because we're talking about infancy and we're talking about growth during infancy. And one of the foundations of human development is secure attachment and attachment. Attachment to a caregiver is crucial. Human infants come into the world and they are dependent on their caregivers. We're not born and able to run yet. We're not born and able to speak yet. We absolutely depend on safe people to take care of us and our needs. Attachment at this stage is so foundational. Attachment is the close emotional bond between an infant and its caregiver. The quality of that attachment is foundational for later development in life. There are 3 features of secure attachment that I want to make sure you understand. Now, secure attachment is the good quality attachment. And people that were securely attached as infants often have better outcomes relationally later in life. Bowlby called it a secure base. When a caregiver is consistent, responsive, and sensitive on a regular basis, They are teaching a child that the world is something that you can trust, and the world is something you can explore, and the world is something that cares about what you're saying and doing. So let's review some of the features of quality attachment: consistency, responsiveness, and sensitivity. So I have a picture here of a mom and a baby. So let's take each of those items and understand them from a perspective of a mom and its infant child. Let's imagine that baby Lucas has a wet diaper right now, and the wet diaper doesn't feel good. And in the not feeling good, baby Lucas can't change his own diaper. He can't stand up, walk over, and change his diaper for himself. He can't even say to his mom, "Hey, I need you to change my diaper." He can only express by crying his discomfort. So every time that his mom meets that need and takes away that discomfort, he is more attached to her because he's had a need, it felt uncomfortable, she made it go away, and he felt better. And the next time he had a need and he was hungry and his tummy was grumbling, and she fed him, and that tummy grumbling, it went away and he felt better. So consistency of attachment has to do with a caregiver meeting the need every time. Meaning that whatever the need is, I meet the need. I don't just let my child cry and cry. I meet the need every time, not every other time. Responsiveness has to do with the accuracy with which I respond. Consistency has to do with time and me responding every time. But responsiveness has to do with me responding in kind. So let's imagine that Lucas, little baby Lucas, is crying right now because he has a wet diaper. If I show up, therefore being consistent, because I show up every time, but if I show up and I bring a bottle to feed him, I haven't met his actual need. I've been consistent and I've been immediate because I've done it quickly, but I haven't been responsive to what the actual need is. Secure attachment thrives when the correct need is met. So when Lucas is crying and I show up and I find that he doesn't want the bottle, I check his diaper and realize, oh my gosh, he's got a wet diaper. We've got to change that. And when I change that, I've responded appropriately to the need. Secure attachment needs consistency, responsiveness, and sensitivity. So let's talk about sensitivity. So let's imagine that Lucas has a wet diaper. I can be consistent by showing up. I can be responsive by knowing that he needs a diaper change. But the manner in which I do the diaper change shows my sensitivity, my maternal sensitivity. So changing the diaper and being like, "Lucas, you're such a good boy. Hi, sweetheart. Hi, baby. Hi." That's way more sensitive than being rough with him, right? Sometimes parents aren't so sensitive. Sometimes they're talking on the phone. Sometimes they just want that diaper changed really quick and they're not as gentle as they could be. So sensitivity has to do with the manner in which I've delivered this need. All in all, secure attachment thrives when a caregiver is immediate, consistent, responsive, and sensitive, meeting the needs of the child and doing so in a gentle, affirming, sensitive way. So let's talk some more about attachment. Attachment is the emotional and physical bond that forms between a child and a caregiver as a result of how the child gets their primary needs consistently, responsively, sensitively met. Children who do not get sufficient attention are at serious risk of mental, social, emotional, and physical delays. Therefore, secure attachment, consistent, responsive, sensitive, it leads to trust. And trust is a foundation of later developmental time periods. We need to have trust that our teachers are teaching us the right things. We need to have trust that our friends are actually being genuine with us. We need to have trust that our romantic partner isn't going to hurt us. We need to have, right? There's so much stuff that depends on trust. If you don't trust the world is a scary place that's against you. And if the world is a scary place against you, you either hide or fight it, right? So trust really is a foundational lesson of secure attachment and an important human lesson. Now, not everybody's story starts out like that, with secure attachment, with trust. Some of those things have to be learned or have to be a growth mindset or resilient through. But when we're given the chance to be mentors or caregivers or parents or in charge of others, we want to foster a sense of secure and healthy attachment. That means that this is a healthy relationship that is consistent, responsive, and sensitive. From that foundation of secure attachment, we can move forward, and we can help others move forward too. Now, one of the reasons that we know what the features of secure attachment are has to do with a classic study by Harlow. So Harlow was assessing essentially the nature of attachment. Is it just we're attached to the person that brings us food? Or is it the person that brings us food and how we feel and how comforted we are that are important to attachment? To study this, he put infant monkeys in 2 different conditions with 2 surrogate mothers. One mother was a wire mother that provided food, and the other was a wire mother that had a cloth around it. That's what this picture is. You can see the little monkey has the food source plus the little washcloth or little towel there. And what happened is that infants absolutely prefer getting the food and having the comfort across situations. Therefore, comfort and the food is critical to attachment. So it being a sensitive and soft place is important. It was really sad because the monkeys, the baby monkeys that were raised with the wire mother only, they were aggressive with their kids. They were not comforting to their kids. When they grew up, that wire mother did not do them well in regard to their socialization skills later. So the wire mother only infant monkeys were more aggressive later on versus the cloth mother monkeys. Early experiences had an impact later. 2 other really big names in regard to attachment are Bowlby and Ainsworth. Bowlby did some research with kids in orphanages and kids that didn't have such a great start. And he saw that a lot of those kids ended up having some criminal involvement or some problems, behavioral problems later from their really rough start. So what Bowlby was theorizing, which we absolutely value now, is the importance of secure attachment, as attachment with a caregiver, a healthy caregiver, is a secure base that lays the foundation for future behavior, future mental processes, and future relationships. The secure base is the place that you learn that the world is safe and can be trusted. The secure base is where you learn how to restrain yourself and not hit other kids and pay attention in class because you are respecting and trusting that the world is not chaotic and there are things that you can do to manage your world and have agency in your world. Kids that are not raised with a secure base really are in fight or flight survival mode all the time. They didn't have a good start. They didn't have a safe place growing up. And a lot of times, if you don't have a safe place growing up, you really don't know how to be a safe place for other people later. Now, a student of Bowlby's, Ainsworth, did an experiment called the Strange Situation Classification. On the basis of this Strange Situation Classification experiment, she created categories that either showed secure attachment or insecure attachment because they were observing different interactions between a baby and its caregiver and a baby and a stranger. And on the basis of the child's interactions with the stranger and the mother, in these series of reunions and departures and reunions again, Mary Ainsworth was able to classify children into being either securely attached or having insecure attachment styles. So what the research shows us is that children that are classified as being securely attached early on in their life tend to have better outcomes in regard to being rated by their coworkers more favorably in their 30s, and you can definitely see the implication for marital relationships, romantic relationships, closeness, and friendships with others. So secure attachment absolutely is protective and beneficial for not only the child's life right now, but the child's life into adulthood. So as we wrap up part 1 of chapter 9, I want you to walk away with an appreciation for the difference between secure attachment and more insecure attachment. So when you were a baby, if you were in the strange situation, which classification group do you think you'd fall into? So what can you do to find yourself more and more in secure attachment scenarios? Who in your life do you have a secure attachment with? Someone that's consistent and responsive and sensitive. If you don't have that, then it's time to look for it, right? For safe, healthy, secure people. All right, you guys, you walked through some really great foundational elements of chapter 9. You can find the second part of chapter 9 right here on our Canvas site. Good job. Catch you later.